I used to think that to impress a wealthy and powerful father, I had to arrive on time, wear the right dress, and say the right things. But then I was 17 minutes late, and that very moment of being late changed everything. Because before I ever made it to that grand dinner, I had stopped for a shivering man on a chilly autumn day, a man no one else seemed to notice. I had no idea. That man was the one quietly deciding the fate of my entire life. Chapter 1: The Dress and the Invitation. No one dares to refuse. I never thought a dress could make my heart pound like this. Not because it was beautiful, although it was undeniably. Navy blue, the fabric smooth and fluid like water slipping through your fingers, the cut hugging every curve of my body as if someone had measured me down to the last centimeter. But because of who sent it, I had just gotten home from work when I saw the box neatly placed in front of my door. Jet black luxurious tied with a silver ribbon, so refined you could tell just by looking it wasn't cheap. No sender. Just my name, Katie Peters, embossed in bold golden letters. At first I thought it was a delivery mistake, until I opened it. Beneath the dress, nestled in a thin sheet of tissue paper, was a small card, written in crisp, commanding script, suitable for Saturday night. Don't disappoint me. Only 2 initials signed below BH. My heart thundered. Brandon Harrington. That name, I had heard it hundreds of times from Sean, my fiancé, but never met the man himself. In our 2 years together, all I knew was that he was a wealthy, hard-headed businessman with a borderline obsession over family prestige. To me, he had always been a cold shadow, hovering behind every conversation about our love story, someone who never even acknowledged my existence, until now. Sean walked in, just as I was holding up the dress. His face turned pale instantly. I didn't need to ask. He already knew. The dress wasn't a gift. It was a signal, a summons. Oh God, Katie, it's really starting. Sean collapsed into the chair, as if the strength had drained from his body. My father has never sent clothing to anyone. Do you know what this means? I looked at him, trying to keep my voice steady, so... You mean he wants to meet me? For what, Sean went quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, voice trembling like a man about to confess a terrible sin. In his world, when Brandon Harrington sends someone an outfit, it means he's about to put them on trial. I laughed, but only for a second before falling completely silent. On trial? Was that what he called a dinner introduction? That's when Sean started talking, truly talking, for the first time in detail, about Amanda, his college ex-girlfriend. She'd been evaluated by Brandon. She lasted 45 minutes, left the dinner, called a cab, and never came back. I imagined a woman being stripped bare emotionally, psychologically, by polite questions alone, and I shivered. It's all a test, Sean said. From your gaze, your tone of voice, how you use your knife and fork, even how you react to a comment that seems innocent on the surface. I looked at the dress now, lying quietly on the table like a soldier awaiting to be worn into battle. I asked him, if I fail, what happens? Sean looked at me, and I had never seen his eyes so sorrowful. Did you know my brother Michael was erased from the family records just because his wife wasn't approved? My father acted like Michael never existed. I went silent. Not because I feared being erased from some prestigious family tree, but because I started to realize this was no ordinary dinner. This was a battlefield I couldn't afford to lose, not to please Brandon, but to keep myself intact. Chapter 2: A Stranger in a World. Not meant for me. Saturday arrived faster than I had expected. The dress had been hanging in my closet for 3 days like a ghost, watching every move I made in my tiny apartment. Each time I looked at it, my chest tightened. I had worn beautiful dresses before, but never had an outfit felt this terrifying. That morning, Sean woke up early, so tense he spilled his coffee all over the table. We didn't talk much, Not because we were upset with each other, but because every word risked triggering the nameless fear looming over what was about to happen. I caught the early afternoon train traveling alone to Millbrook Heights, the luxury estate where Brandon Harrington lived. Sean said he would meet me there. My father doesn't like people who are late, he warned, his voice flat as if reading a will. I sat in first class for the first time in my life, yet felt anything but comfortable. The train window reflected my face back at me, the face of a woman trying to enter a world that wasn't hers. My hair had been styled into an elegant updo by the kind neighbor down the hall. My makeup was the result of cramming 3 YouTube tutorials into one night. And of course the expensive dress, something so pristine that even the tiniest stain could cost me the entire relationship. I thought of my family, my parents, a high school teacher, and an overworked nurse who took double shifts to put me through school. Our simple but warm dinners. The weekends I ran free book readings for kids in low-income neighborhoods, a job I knew Brandon would never even acknowledge. I was me, Katie Peters. But today I was playing someone else. Millbrook Heights appeared through the train window like a scene from a sci-fi painting. Everything was perfect to an absurd degree. Sidewalks gleamed like glass flowers, arranged with surgical precision, and every home looked like a mansion straight out of a movie. No one looked like me. No one dressed like me. I felt like I was walking into a high-budget dream I didn't belong in. I stepped off at the station, holding the handwritten directions Sean had given me, a map to the Harrington estate. As I stood there trying to orient myself, a woman approached elegantly, dressed smiling politely but with a scrutinizing gaze. "You're not from around here, are you? I don't recognize your face." I nodded, keeping my tone respectful. "I'm visiting a friend." She looked me up and down. I knew that look, someone used to living in a closed, curated circle. She then suggested I call for a car, because the hills around here aren't ideal for walking in heels. I thanked her, but chose to walk anyway. I needed time to breathe. I needed a few quiet minutes to remind myself I wasn't here to beg for acceptance. I was here to confront whatever was waiting, whatever the outcome. As I turned onto a quieter street, I froze. On a small park bench by the roadside sat an elderly man, frail, wearing a coat, so thin the cold wind nearly passed right through it. A figure entirely out of place in this wealthy paradise. I considered walking on, but my feet wouldn't move. He turned toward me, eyes pale blue, and still yet deep, as though he had lived 1,000 lifetimes. "Good evening," he said in a refined British accent I'd only ever heard in old films. "Hello," I replied softly. I glanced at my watch. Exactly 20 minutes until the appointment. If I kept walking now, I'd make it. If I lingered, I'd be late. But the old man was shivering. I thought about the sandwich in my bag, a small snack I'd packed to avoid fainting from hunger before what was bound to be an exhausting dinner. I thought about the cashmere scarf around my neck, the one Sean had bought, coordinated with the dress as part of his strategy to win over his father. Then I remembered my grandmother's words when I was little. "My dear, your dignity isn't in your shoes or your purse. It's in how you treat people who have nothing to give you in return." I sat beside him, took out the sandwich, wrapped the scarf around his shoulders. He looked stunned, moved, thanking me with eyes I'll never forget. And when I stood up to leave, it was already 6:57 p.m. I knew I wouldn't make it in time. I was late. But somehow in that moment, I felt lighter. I didn't know what was waiting behind the gates of the Harrington estate, but I knew I had just made the right choice. Chapter 3, 17 minutes late. And a stranger inside Sean. I arrived at the Harrington estate gate at exactly 7:17 p.m. My heart pounded at the sight of the towering wrought iron gate gleaming black, embossed with the powerful H crest. In front of me stood a white stone mansion lined with columns as grand as a European castle. A warm golden light glowed from the massive glass windows, making the whole place feel even more unreal. But it wasn't the splendor that took my breath away. It was Sean's face standing on the front steps, eyes burning, I didn't even get a word out before he rushed down, grabbed my arm, and held it tight. 17 minutes, Katie. You're 17 minutes late. I didn't recognize his voice. It was no longer the Sean I knew, the gentle boyfriend who used to hold my hand on sunny afternoons. This was someone else. Frantic, angry, and panicked. Do you have any idea what this means? To my father, to me, to the future of us. I looked into his eyes that didn't ask if I was okay. Not a single word of concern. Only barely restrained fury choking the air between us. And I knew he wasn't mad because he was worried about me. He was mad because I hadn't followed the plan. I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. I'm sorry, but there was an old man. He was shivering in the cold. He hadn't eaten all day. Sean froze for a second, then scoffed. You were late 17 minutes because of a homeless guy, Katie. Do you understand that this is Brandon Harrington's mansion? I fell silent. Every word from him was like a blade slicing into me. This isn't one of your charity events. This is an evaluation. This is a test. You're wearing a $3,000 dress. You're wearing the cashmere scarf I picked to match every tone. And you gave it away to some vagrant. I stood there. The cold wind seeped through the thin fabric of my dress. But nothing felt colder than the gaze of the man I once thought was my safe harbor. I replied quietly, my voice low. Did you not see a human being, Sean? He shook his head, almost laughed a choked, bitter sound. What I saw was someone who made you ruin everything. And you did. We rehearsed for weeks. You promised to be on time. You promised not to say anything stupid. And now, his eyes dropped to my neck. They widened. Where's the scarf? I didn't say a word. The $700 cashmere scarf, you knew how important that was, didn't you? It was a symbol, Katie. A statement to my father that you belong in this world. I whispered I gave it to him. He was cold. Sean recoiled like I had slapped him. You can't do that. Do you not understand, or do you just not care? My father notices every detail. You were wearing the uniform of a warrior going into battle, and you discarded it over some moment of compassion. Do you even know the cost of softness? I looked at him, and I no longer recognized the man I had once loved. Then I didn't answer, because at that moment there was a soft sound. The heavy wooden door creaked open, slow, deliberate, majestic. A butler in a black suit stepped out, bowing courteously. Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Please come in. No time for explanations. No chance to undo anything. Sean immediately adjusted his tie. His expression shifted into performance mode, like an actor about to step on stage. He turned to me and hissed under his breath, "Don't mention the homeless guy. Don't talk about being late. Don't bring up the scarf. And don't be yourself. Be the version I trained you to be." I took a deep breath. Something inside me broke, not loud, but sharp and unmistakable. I nodded. Not to obey, but to walk forward. No longer to beg for acceptance, but to face everything as I truly am. Chapter 4. The Fateful Dinner and the Mysterious Scarf. I stepped through the doors of the Harrington estate, no longer the hopeful girl I had been that morning. Everything had unraveled: my thoughts, my emotions, my composure. The scent of polished wood, the trace of expensive cologne, the soft golden light spilling across the marble floors. All of it made me feel completely out of place, like I didn't belong, like I wasn't meant to be here. Sean gripped my hand tightly, whispering in a rushed stream, "Don't look him in the eye. Don't talk too much. Don't mention your job. Don't be yourself, okay?" I didn't respond, because a different question had started echoing in my mind. If I'm not allowed to be myself in this house, then who exactly is the one walking in? The butler led us through a hallway that felt like a maze. Classical oil paintings lined the walls, flickering candlelight reflecting off marble busts. Everything was quiet, too quiet. as though the house itself was watching me, measuring each footstep, each breath. We stopped in front of an ornate wooden door carved with lions. The butler opened it, and there he was, sitting at the head of a table long enough for a board meeting. A simple white dress shirt, silver hair combed immaculately. But it was his eyes that made me forget how to breathe. It was him. The homeless man I'd met that afternoon. The cashmere scarf I had given him still hung over his shoulders, a haunting reminder like a silent brand. I froze. Sean, seeing him, went stiff, then completely pale, as if life had drained from his body. "No way," he muttered, barely audible. Brandon Harrington looked up. His gaze shimmered with something I couldn't define. Affection, sharpness, pride. "Katie," he said with a smile that was warm. "Apologies for the little trick earlier today. I hope you don't mind that I tested you a bit." I swallowed hard. My heart thundered. Everything began to shatter and reassemble inside my head. He had pretended to be homeless. He had been there. He saw everything. Sean looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He stammered, "Dad, why didn't you say something? You tested her?" Brandon didn't even glance at Sean. He kept his eyes solely on me as if I were the only person in the room. "No, I didn't test her," he said calmly, not a hint of anger in his tone. "I gave her the opportunity to show who she really was, and she did perfectly. When no one was watching, Katie chose compassion over scoring points. She did the right thing, even when she thought it would cost her everything." Sean's face had turned colorless. His arms dropped helplessly to his sides. And me, I felt choked up. Not because of the praise, but because for the first time someone truly saw me and didn't ask me to change. Brandon rose from his seat and pulled out the chair to his right, the place of honor. "Katie, your place is here, beside me. Please have a seat. We have much to talk about." I looked at Sean one last time. He stood frozen silent like a statue carved out of pure disappointment. Then I walked toward Brandon Harrington. Not for the cashmere scarf, not for legacy or wealth, but because I was no longer afraid of the truth. And the truth was, I had never belonged anywhere so clearly as I did now. Chapter 5. The True Father and the Final Choice. I sat down to the right of Mr. Brandon in a silence so deep I could hear the soft clink of a glass brushing against porcelain. Dinner had already been served, beautiful, refined, but I didn't feel the slightest bit hungry. Brandon said nothing for a few seconds. He simply looked at me as if weighing the value of a major investment. But what surprised me was his gaze wasn't cold. It held curiosity and a hint of gentleness. "Katie," he began, his voice low and steady. "You know, in the past 40 years, I've met all kinds of people. People who come to take, people who come to beg, people who come to perform. But it's rare, very rare, to meet someone who comes to give and expects nothing in return." I didn't know how to respond. Everything was happening too fast. But something inside me felt safe, as if I no longer had to perform as someone I wasn't. This afternoon, he continued, his fingers gently touching the scarf still resting on his shoulder. "When you stopped, shared your meal, and gave your scarf to an old man trembling in the cold, right in a place that practically forbids poverty, you reminded me of my wife." His words made me look up. A flicker of sorrow passed through his composed face. "She used to say, the only way to see someone's true nature is to watch what they do when no one's watching. It was her idea to conduct these little tests, not to judge, but to find hope." I whispered, "And Sean, what about him?" His expression shifted. Not angry, not cold, just quietly heartbroken. He used to be such a tender-hearted boy, but then he grew up in a world of expectations, of success, of fear of being cut out of this family, and somewhere along the way, he learned to survive by wearing a mask. I fear he no longer remembers who he once was. Each word sank into me like lead. Then Brandon looked at me again this time, his gaze sharp as a blade. Katie, I wasn't testing you. I was testing Sean. I wanted to see if the woman he loved was full of compassion. Would he protect her, or would he try to mold her into a version he believed was acceptable? I turned to look at Sean. He was sitting at the far end of the table, head bowed, eyes hollow. Maybe now he finally understood that everything he had tried to build had crumbled. Not because I wasn't enough, but because he had never truly believed in the real me. Brandon gently patted my hand. You don't have to make any decisions tonight, but remember this. I don't need a daughter-in-law who knows which wine glass to use. I need a woman who knows how to give, how to love, and how to stand on her own. I felt a lump rising in my throat. And if your son doesn't deserve that, Brandon smiled, not mockingly, but with deep understanding, then I will still choose you as family. Chapter 6. When the Mask Falls. We left Brandon's estate in silence. No one said a word the entire ride home, and in that moment, I felt as if I were sitting next to a stranger, not my fiancé. Sean didn't cry. He wasn't angry. He didn't try to justify anything. He just drove quietly, his eyes fixed on the road, but I knew his mind was spiraling into a panic he couldn't escape. As for me, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because everything was okay, but because I knew I hadn't lost myself. When the apartment door closed behind us, Sean suddenly stopped in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, his shoulders trembling, and then he broke down like a child abandoned in the dark. Katie, he whispered, voice raw and hoarse. I'm sorry. I'm sorry not just for tonight, but for the past 2 years. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and watched. My eyes were dry, not because I was cold, but because I had already cried everything a long time ago on the inside. I tried to shape you into someone I thought my father would accept, he said. I told myself it was to protect you, but really, it was because I was afraid of not being loved, afraid of being rejected by him, and because I was scared. I betrayed you. I walked over. I didn't hug him. I didn't comfort him. I just asked one question. Did you ever truly believe that the real me deserved to be loved? He choked, unable to answer. I turned away. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew this. If I were to love someone, I needed them to love both the beautiful and the imperfect parts of me, not erase my flaws and then call it love. Over the next few days, Sean didn't leave the house. He skipped work, ignored every call from his father. I didn't blame him. For the first time in his life, he had to face the truth. Not everyone is taught how to love the right way. And then one morning, I saw him quietly walk into the free literacy center I ran. He bowed his head and asked to volunteer. No one recognized him as the son of Brandon Harrington, the millionaire the press often talked about. Here he was, just Mr. Sean the guy, learning how to listen, how to build Lego castles with kids, and how to read comic books out loud with enthusiasm. I watched him from a distance. For the first time, he wasn't trying to prove anything, wasn't trying to be perfect. He was simply present and kind. Maybe he was changing. Maybe he wasn't. But now that decision no longer belonged to him. Chapter 7. A price to pay, or a chance to take. To be honest, I'm not sure what made me keep walking alongside Sean at that point. Maybe it was because I saw that he was genuinely remorseful. Maybe it was because I recognized something in him, a part wounded by control and fear, just like the part that had once lived inside me. But forgiveness? No, not yet. Sean began to change. He spoke less. He listened more. He no longer lectured me on how to speak at dinner parties or how to shake hands the proper upper-class way. Now he simply asked, "What can I help you with at the center today?" That was it. But it felt right. One afternoon, as I was folding the comic books, the kids had left scattered after class, Sean walked over and placed a folder in front of me. I opened it. It was a detailed proposal for a fundraising campaign to expand the center, something I had always dreamed of, but never believed I was capable of doing. I'm not trying to make up for anything, he said. I just want to be a part of it. For the first time, I saw in his eyes no trace of pleading for approval, only patience, as if he was willing to wait as long as it took, as long as I was still there. Just when I started to think maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us, Brandon invited me to a private dinner without Sean. I stepped into the dining room with that familiar caution, but Brandon was different this time. No longer the imposing father-in-law, he smiled warmly, like a real father. Katie, he asked, do you believe people can truly change? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. I don't believe in words, but I believe in actions repeated. He nodded, just like kindness. It doesn't come from one grand gesture, but from choosing to be kind every day, even when no one is watching. After dinner, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a lifetime sponsorship contract for the community education system I had been quietly dreaming of. I was speechless. You don't have to become someone else to deserve this, family. I've seen enough. I stood, walked slowly over to him, and said gently, I know. But what about Sean? Brandon smiled the kind of smile worn by someone who's lived through life's harshest lessons. Now it's your decision to make, to forgive or to walk forward alone. Whichever you choose, you won't lose me. And for the first time, I understood I had a choice. I wasn't being forced to fit in to be accepted. I had the right to choose what was best for me. Chapter 8. The terms for starting over. After dinner with Brandon, I returned to the apartment with my head spinning. Not because of the value of the sponsorship contract, but because of the relief. I no longer had to try to become someone who fit the Harrington family. I had simply been myself, and that in the end was enough. Sean greeted me at the door. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to read my expression. He just quietly took my bag from my hands as if to say, You must be tired. Let me. I placed the contract on the table. He glanced at it, then looked up. My father signed it, I nodded, and I added, Because he trusts me, not because I'm your fiancé. Sean nodded, offering no defense, no excuses. He simply sat down across from me. Katie, he said quietly, I want to ask for a chance, not to go back to the way things were, but to rebuild from the ground up if you'll let me. I looked at him for a long time. I remembered the times he had silenced my voice, made me hide my job, asked me to keep my parents in the background. I remembered his cold stare when I arrived late because of a homeless man. But I also remembered the past few weeks, him sitting cross-legged on the classroom floor, trying to sound out syllables with little Maria. How he sighed in confusion reading my essay, but read to the very last line anyway. How he started to listen instead of plan to fix me. If you really want to start over, I said slowly, then it has to be built on my foundation, not yours, not your family's. Mine, the woman you once tried to reshape. He nodded, without hesitation. Then I said, we try again, but this time you don't lead. You learn to walk beside me. Sean stood and walked over to me. He didn't hug me, didn't give a flowery apology. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder and said, I'll learn, every day. And I believed him, not because he said it well, but because now he knew when to be silent, so I could be fully, unapologetically myself. Chapter 9. I no longer need to be accepted. The moment I stepped back into the literacy center, all the pressure and constraint I'd been carrying these past weeks simply dissolved. I wasn't wearing a $1,000 dress. I didn't need nude lipstick to look mature. All I needed was an old t-shirt, a whiteboard, and a group of children waiting to hear their names. I was myself, and that was enough. Maria, the little girl who once burst into tears after finishing her very first chapter, was now working on a short essay about her dream to become a writer. I leaned down, read every crooked letter of her handwriting, and felt my heart bloom. Here no one judged me by the color of my dress or the fabric of my scarf. Here, kindness didn't need to be wrapped in a label of deserving. Sean started showing up every Tuesday afternoon. At first, he just stood at the door quietly observing. Then I let him help hand out books. Soon after, he suggested hosting a soft skills workshop for the older kids. A month later, he taught an entire session on how to write a CV. He was no longer the Harrington heir trying to polish his image. He had become part of this community, natural, humble, and willing to listen. Brandon, too, had changed. He was no longer the cold figure at the head of the dinner table. He attended one of our end-of-term showcases, still wearing his suit. But his eyes welled up as he listened to a little boy recount the first day he learned how to read the street signs on his walk to school. Brandon shook hands with every teacher, including Ms. Dahlia, who wore a faded shirt. He didn't mention the value of the contract, didn't talk about investment. He only asked, "How many more books do you need for next year?" That simple question to me meant everything. I no longer felt like I was being accepted into their world, because I knew now I was the one who had opened a new door. Not with money, not with a fancy degree, but with unconditional kindness. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. Chapter 10. A Real Proposal. I was reorganizing the bookshelf at the Literacy Center when Sean walked in. No announcement, no text message, no flowers. Just him, his shoes still dusted with dirt, and a seriousness in his eyes I rarely saw. I turned around, about to ask what he needed, but he raised a hand as if to say, "Please, let me go first." That night, he began, his voice low, slightly trembling, "When you draped that scarf over my father's shoulders. You didn't just warm a man, you moved a family that had forgotten what love even felt like." I stood still. He stepped closer, each movement careful, as though walking across thin ice. "I proposed to you once with a ring, a fancy dinner, and a carefully calculated plan. But that night I realized I wasn't worthy of you." His voice cracked. "I loved you, but I loved you the wrong way. I loved the version of you my father could approve of. I loved the version I could control. I was afraid you wouldn't be good enough for my world. But the truth is, I wasn't good enough for yours." My chest tightened. Sean reached into his coat pocket. He didn't kneel and gently pulled out the old gray scarf. The same scarf I had once given to the homeless man on the bench. Brandon had returned it to me after the dinner that changed everything, neatly folded with a handwritten note tucked inside. "This doesn't belong to me. It is her proof." Sean held the scarf out to me. "I don't have a new ring. I don't have the perfect proposal. But if you'll have me, I want to begin again, this time with the real me. No performance, no hiding." I didn't say a word. I simply wrapped the scarf around my neck and nodded. No fireworks, no applause. Just two people once lost, now choosing to walk forward together with open, honest hearts. Chapter 11. A Wedding Without a Stage. I had never dreamed of a lavish wedding dress or a ballroom draped in gold. To me, a beautiful wedding is one where everyone present knows exactly why they're there, not for show, but for something real. So we chose to have our wedding in the backyard of my parents' house. The floral arch was arranged by Mom and me using wildflowers. We picked from the local farmer's market. The ribbon garlands hanging from the fence were handmade by the kids from my literacy center, cut unevenly, glitter glued on clumsily, and so full of love, it nearly made me cry. And the song I walked out to was played on guitar by Michael Sean's brother, the one who had once been erased from the family, now back, his hands steady as ever. Sean stood there under a paper flower arch wearing a suit that wasn't designer, but I knew he had ironed it himself, every crease with care. His eyes looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, truly seeing me without any disguise. Brandon sat in the front row. He didn't cry, but I noticed his hand kept brushing against the gray scarf he had worn all morning, the scarf I once gave him on a park bench back when I didn't know who he was. When my father rose to walk me down the aisle, his knees visibly shook. Brandon stepped forward, and gently placed a hand on my dad's shoulder. "Allow me to walk with you," he said. "This is the daughter we're both lucky to love." I couldn't hold it in anymore. All my makeup melted into tears, but I'd never felt more beautiful. because I was no longer pretending to be anyone else. Sean didn't read his vows from paper. He looked at me and spoke like he would on an ordinary winter night beside our kitchen stove. I once wanted you to be suitable. But now I just want to be worthy. I promise never to love you for the things you can change. I promise to always love the part of you that protects the small things, the heart that gave away its last meal, and your most expensive scarf to a stranger. If you choose me, I'll learn to love like you with action, without conditions. I held his hand and replied, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real, because it's the truth that led me to this love. When we kissed for the first time as husband and wife, there was no roaring applause, only the soft rustle of wind through the trees, a few kids in the back shouting, Teacher, looks so pretty, and Brandon's eyes quiet, warm as if he was seeing his late wife in me somehow. No castles, no designer labels, no guests beyond those who truly mattered. Because the most beautiful weddings are the ones where all the pretending has already been left behind. Chapter 12, The Air of Kindness. After the wedding, I didn't move into Brandon's mansion like many had expected. Sean and I continued living in our old modest apartment, the one with peeling paint on the walls and windows that jammed whenever it rained. But it was where I began my journey to becoming myself, and I didn't want to forget that. Brandon never pressured us. He simply said, every person needs a home that reminds them who they are. But if one day you want to build a home for other children, I'll help you do that. And he kept his word. 3 months after the wedding, Brandon officially partnered with me to build the first community education center. Not just a place to teach literacy, but a place to teach compassion. We named it the Gray Scarf Foundation, a name that puzzled many, but I never explained it right away. I wanted people to ask. I wanted the chance to tell the story of a scarf not for its material worth, but for the human value it represented. Sean, once a man afraid of his father's gaze, was now our foundation's director of operations. He no longer tried to fix me. Instead, he learned how to walk with me. In fact, there were moments when he was the one reminding me to slow down, to listen, to trust the path I had chosen when everything became overwhelming. I remember one time a major investor came in, offering a substantial donation on the condition that the center be renamed after him. Sean turned him down flat before I even said a word. The name of this center isn't to glorify those who give money, he said, but to remind people that giving from kindness is worth more than any logo. In that moment, I looked at him and felt overwhelming gratitude, not because he protected the foundation, but because he had truly changed from the inside out. Brandon came by the center every Saturday afternoon. No private car, no chauffeur. He preferred sitting in the library, reading with the children. Sometimes he just sat quietly watching a little girl hunch over her vowels, or a boy sounding out syllables with shaky confidence. They remind me of you, he once said, eyes glistening. Resilient, quiet, and never forgetting to see the person before the circumstance. I don't know what Brandon once hoped for in a future daughter-in-law. But I know one thing for certain. If he were still pretending to be a homeless man on a park bench, he would still choose me, not because of who I was, but because of what I did when no one was watching. Chapter 13, The Defining Choice That Day. I stood alone by the window at the Gray Scarf Foundation, watching the children play in the backyard. It had just rained. The tiles were still marked with puddles, but above them the sky had already started to turn blue again. Something about that moment pulled me back to that afternoon in Millbrook Heights when I first met the deep blue eyes of a homeless man. My life changed because of one decision. I used to think that meeting Brandon Harrington was the greatest test of my life, but it wasn't. The real test came before I knew who he was, when I still chose to give away the last things I had. A sandwich from my bag, a cashmere scarf around my neck, and a single minute of hesitation that made me late for the rest of my future. But those small things opened the door to every great thing that followed. If I had walked past him that day, maybe I would have arrived on time. Maybe Brandon would have smiled, impressed by my punctuality. Maybe Sean would have remained the dutiful son his father approved of. But I would no longer be me. And I would have carried this question for the rest of my life. What if I had stopped? What if I had reached out? People often ask me, Katie, do you ever regret risking everything to help a stranger? I always smile because I know it wasn't a risk. It was the right choice. Today I saw Maria again, the little girl who once couldn't write her own name. She just received a scholarship to a specialized high school. She hugged me, tears falling. You didn't just teach me how to read. You taught me to believe I was worth it. Once I stopped for a man who was cold and hungry. Now I stop for every child, every heart, every fragile dream that hasn't bloomed yet. True wealth, I've come to learn, isn't found in the assets my father-in-law owns or in the $3,000 dress I once wore. It's in every grateful glance, every quiet thank you, every hand that reaches out from the dark because someone saw them at just the right moment. If you're hearing this story, if you're standing at a crossroads facing a choice the world might call small or insignificant, remember this: sometimes the tiniest choices turn out to be the ones that change everything. Just like I once chose a man, a scarf, a moment of kindness, and through that I found a family, a purpose, and a life that truly matters. My life didn't change because of $1,000 dress or a compliment from a millionaire. My life changed because I chose kindness even when no one was watching. If you ever find yourself choosing between being on time and being there for someone, between doing things right and doing what's right, choose kindness. Because sometimes just one small pause, one moment of compassion can lead you to a door you never saw coming, a door that leads to where you truly belong.